You're walking down the street right now, phone in one hand, coffee in the other, completely unaware that you're doing something almost no other creature on this planet does. 2 legs, upright spine, hands free. It feels ordinary because you've never known anything else. But the real answer for why your body moves this way is far stranger than you think. And it starts millions of years before phones, before coffee, before cities existed at all. Every other large mammal on Earth runs on 4 legs. Every one. Dogs, horses, elephants, lions. Your closest living relatives, the chimpanzees and gorillas, all of them move through the world on all 4s, at least most of the time. Somewhere in your family tree, something broke that pattern completely. An ancestor stood up and stayed up forever. Why would evolution do that? Standing on 2 legs is slower than running on 4. It's less stable. It exposes your entire underside to a predator with claws and teeth. From almost every angle, walking upright looks like a bad trade. So why did your ancestors make it anyway? The answer isn't one clean reason. It's several separate pressures, stacking on top of each other, over millions of years, each one nudging your ancestors a little further off the ground. Energy, temperature, freedom of the hands, and a landscape that was quietly changing shape beneath their feet. Let's take them one at a time, because the first one alone is enough to change how you see your own legs. Start with the math, because the math is where this story actually begins. In the 1980s, researchers named Peter Rodman and Henry McHenry ran a simple comparison. They measured how much energy a chimpanzee burns moving on its knuckles across the ground and compared it to how much energy a human burns walking upright over the same distance. The difference was enormous. Chimpanzee knuckle-walking costs roughly 4 times more energy than human bipedal walking, mile for mile. 4 times. Think about what that means over a lifetime. An animal that walks on 4 legs is spending calories it could be using to grow, to reproduce, to survive a lean season. An animal that walks on 2 legs is barely spending anything at all by comparison. In a world where food is never guaranteed, that difference isn't small. It's the difference between starving in a drought and making it through to the next season. Somewhere around 6 to 4 million years ago, the forests of East Africa began thinning out. Climate shifts pulled apart dense, unbroken canopy into patchy woodland and open grassland. Food that used to be everywhere, clustered directly overhead in a forest canopy, was suddenly scattered farther apart on the ground, across longer distances between trees. An ancestor who could cover that distance for a quarter of the energy cost had an advantage that compounded every single day of its life. That's not a small nudge. That's the kind of pressure evolution builds entire body plans around. Every rib, every hip bone, every knee joint slowly bent toward the same outcome, generation after generation, without any single ancestor ever choosing it on purpose. But energy alone doesn't explain everything, because there's a second force working on your ancestors at the exact same time, and it has nothing to do with calories. It has to do with heat. In the 1990s, a researcher named Peter Wheeler proposed something called the thermoregulation hypothesis. Thermoregulation just means how a body manages its own temperature. Wheeler's idea was simple. Picture the African savanna at midday, sun directly overhead, ground radiating heat back up from below. An animal moving on 4 legs has its entire back exposed to that direct overhead sun for hours at a time. An animal standing upright presents a much smaller surface area to that same overhead sun. Less skin facing the sky means less heat absorbed. Wheeler calculated that standing upright could cut solar heat gain by as much as 60% during the hottest parts of the day, and upright posture does something else too. It lifts your body higher off the ground into cooler moving air away from the blistering heat radiating straight up from bare, sun-baked earth. 4 legs keeps an animal low, hot, and exposed. 2 legs lifts it up and out of the worst of it. Have you ever wondered why humans are covered in millions of sweat glands, while most other mammals barely sweat at all? That's connected to this same story. Once your ancestors were upright, cooling the body efficiently became even more critical because upright posture let them stay active during the hottest hours of the day, exactly when 4-legged competitors and predators were forced to retreat into shade to avoid overheating. Standing up wasn't just about saving energy anymore, it was about claiming hours of the day that almost nothing else on the savanna could survive moving through. So now you have two separate pressures pointing in the exact same direction. Save energy. Manage heat. And then a third pressure arrives, and this one has nothing to do with survival in the moment at all. This one is about what your hands are suddenly free to do, once they're no longer needed for walking. An anthropologist named Owen Lovejoy proposed what's now called the provisioning hypothesis. The idea is straightforward. A four-legged animal's front limbs are locked into a full-time job. They hold up the front of the body and drive it forward with every single step. There's no time off from that job. No spare capacity left over. But an upright animal's front limbs are suddenly unemployed. Free. Available for something else entirely. What would that freedom actually be used for? Carrying. Food back to a mate, or back to a small group waiting somewhere safer. Tools. Sharpened rocks and sticks used to dig, to defend, to break open something that used to be unreachable. Infants who could no longer cling to a mother's back the way infant chimpanzees do, once that back was held vertical instead of horizontal. For the first time, an animal could gather far more than it could eat in one sitting and physically transport the surplus somewhere else entirely. That single ability rewired everything downstream of it. Sharing food between individuals who weren't even present at the moment it was found. Cooperating in small, dependent groups. Raising infants who took years, not months, to become independent, because someone else could now carry both the food and the child at the same time. You are, right now, reading this because an ancestor's hands became available for something other than walking. Every tool you've ever held, every bag you've ever carried home from a store, traces back to that same original freedom. There's a fourth piece to this, and it's more instinctive than mathematical. Standing upright means standing taller. And in tall savanna grass, height is information. A four-legged animal moving through grass that reaches its shoulders is moving mostly blind, unable to see more than a few feet ahead in any direction. An animal standing upright can see over that same grass, spot a predator crouched in the distance, spot a rival troop approaching from across a clearing, spot fruit hanging in a tree 50 yards away long before reaching it. Being tall in tall grass isn't just convenient. It can be the difference between spotting a lion in time to run and never seeing it at all. Put those four pressures together. Less energy spent covering long distances between shrinking patches of forest. Less heat absorbed under a brutal equatorial sun. Hands finally free to carry, build, and share. Eyes lifted above the grass line to spot danger before it ever arrived. None of these forces needed to act alone. They reinforced each other, generation after generation, until an entire skeleton had quietly reorganized itself around standing upright. And the fossil record actually lets you watch this happen in slow motion, almost frame by frame. A skeleton nicknamed Ardi, belonging to a species called Ardipithecus ramidus and dated to around 4.4 million years ago, shows a creature caught halfway through the transition. Still built for climbing trees, but already carrying the early architecture of upright walking inside its pelvis. A little over 1 million years later, a far more famous skeleton named Lucy, belonging to Australopithecus afarensis, shows a spine, hips, and knees almost fully committed to walking upright, full-time, on open ground. Somewhere between those two skeletons, the balance had tipped for good. Your ancestors weren't going back down onto four legs, ever again. There's one more piece of evidence worth sitting with because it shows just how far this transformation eventually went. Standing upright wasn't the finish line. It was only the starting point for something even stranger, running. Not in short bursts, but for hours at a time. In the early 2000s, researchers Dennis Bramble and Daniel Lieberman laid out what's now called the endurance running hypothesis. The idea is this: almost no other large mammal on Earth can run for long, sustained distances in serious heat. A cheetah can outrun a human over 100 meters without any contest at all. But a cheetah can only sustain that speed for less than a minute before its own body temperature spikes to dangerous levels, forcing it to stop and recover in shade. A human, by comparison, sweating instead of panting, can keep moving for hours under the same blazing sun, slowly, steadily, without ever needing to stop. That's not a coincidence either. It's a direct byproduct of everything that came before it. the narrow waist and rotating torso that let your shoulders swing independently from your hips, the long, springy tendons in your legs and feet that store and release energy with every stride, almost like a mechanical spring built from tissue, the dense network of sweat glands cooling your skin instead of your lungs. Every one of those features, stacked together, turned your ancestors into something almost no other predator on the savanna could match. An animal that could simply outlast anything it was chasing, wearing prey down over hours in open heat until exhaustion did the rest of the work. Long before spears, before bows, before any weapon at all, endurance itself may have been the very first hunting tool your ancestors ever owned. Here's where the story takes a turn nobody expects, though, because standing upright wasn't a free upgrade. It came with a cost so severe it still threatens the survival of nearly every human being born since. And the cost centers on something that sounds completely unrelated to walking at all: giving birth. Walking upright required a narrower pelvis. A narrower pelvis is more stable and more energy efficient for a two-legged gait, transferring force straight up through the hips with far less side-to-side wobble on every step. But at almost the exact same time in your evolutionary history, your ancestors' brains were beginning to expand dramatically, nearly tripling in size over a few million years. A narrower pelvis and a bigger head are two demands pulling in completely opposite directions. Something had to give. Anthropologists call the result the obstetric dilemma. Human childbirth is dangerous, painful, and difficult in a way that's almost unheard of among other primates, precisely because an infant's skull has to squeeze through a birth canal that evolution narrowed for the sake of efficient walking. Human babies are born earlier, less developed, and more helpless than almost any other primate infant, essentially evicted before they're finished developing, because staying inside any longer would make birth far more dangerous or impossible to survive. That single unfinished quality of every human infant, requiring years of intense parental care just to reach basic independence, is a direct, physical price paid for walking upright in the first place. Isn't it strange that something as ordinary as putting one foot in front of the other reshaped childbirth itself? The cost doesn't stop there either. Your lower back carries the entire weight of your upper body directly down through a narrow, stacked column of vertebrae, which is part of why lower back pain affects the vast majority of people at some point in their lives. A problem four-legged animals with their weight spread across four limbs almost never experience in the same way. Standing upright pushes blood against gravity on its entire way back up from your legs to your heart, which is a major reason humans develop varicose veins and hernias at rates other primates simply don't. Every uncomfortable, aching, distinctly human ailment you've ever complained about in your lower back, your feet, or your legs is an echo of a trade made millions of years ago when energy savings and freed up hands were worth more than a body that would eventually ache under its own upright weight. And that trade is still playing out inside your body today, just in a completely different setting than the one it was built for. Your spine, your hips, your legs, all of it evolved to walk for miles, every single day, across open ground, searching, carrying, scanning the horizon. Instead, you likely spend most of your waking hours sitting, in a car, at a desk, on a couch, phone in hand, the exact same body that was engineered over millions of years for constant upright movement now spends most of its time folded into a chair. That mismatch is a big part of why so many modern health problems, chronic back pain, poor posture, stiff hips, tight hamstrings, trace back to inactivity rather than injury. Your skeleton is still running 4 million-year-old software, tuned for walking long distances across a landscape while searching for food, carrying tools, scanning for danger on the horizon. It was never tuned for 8 hours in an office chair, or a long drive, or a night spent hunched over a phone screen. Every time you feel that ache after too many hours sitting still, that's not really a modern problem at all. That's an ancient body doing exactly what it was built to do, quietly protesting the one thing it was never designed for: staying still. So the next time you're walking somewhere, anywhere, down a hallway, across a parking lot, along a sidewalk toward your front door, notice what your body is actually doing. Notice how little energy it costs you compared to almost any other large animal covering the same distance on 4 legs. Notice how your hands are free the entire time, doing nothing in particular, capable of carrying anything you choose to pick up along the way. That freedom, that efficiency was earned over millions of years, paid for with a narrower pelvis, a harder birth, an aching lower back, and a body now caught between the open planes it evolved to cross and the chairs it spends most of its life sitting in instead. You're walking down the street right now, phone in one hand, coffee in the other, and it still feels completely ordinary. But it never was. It's the end result of one of the strangest trades any animal has ever made. Energy for danger, freedom for pain, standing up and never sitting back down again for good.